Hi there. For this video, we're going to look at the principles of operant conditioning, right? So we have classical conditioning, which is learning and association between two things that previously weren't associated with each other. And once that association is learned, we're seeing a change in behavior. That behavior is centered on involuntary behaviors, reflexes, things we can't control. With operant conditioning, what we want to look at is a behavior has already been performed. And then what we're going to see is the consequences of that behavior will impact the likelihood of that behavior occurring again or not occurring again. Right. So this is something that just naturally occurs in life as you do different things, as you just have your normal life experiences. There are always consequences, either good or bad, to the things that we do. And depending on those consequences, depending on the outcome of our behavior, it makes it more or less likely that we will do or not do that behavior again. Right. So if you bought a new shirt and you wore that shirt to work or to school or whatever, and then someone made a comment that you didn't like, right? They were kind of like, well, about your shirt. Well, you might be less inclined to wear that again, right? So we're going to lower the likelihood of that behavior. Or you're driving to school or to work, whatever it is, and you're like, I want to try a different route. I'm going to see if it works out better for me. And it turns out it does. It shaved 10 minutes off your commute. Well, you are now more likely to do that behavior again. And so, what operant conditioning wants to do is not just say, well, yeah, that makes sense. The consequences of our behavior make it more or less likely that we'll repeat a behavior in the future. But rather, what it wants to do is specifically control or manipulate those consequences so that we have that control over the behavior. So the person does whatever we want them to do, whatever we don't want them to do. We're going to control what that consequence is. And then based on that control, that person will do what we want them to, either repeating or not repeating that behavior. Okay. So the main researcher in this area is B.F. Skinner, right? So he is one of the most prolific psychologist of all time. If he's not number one, he's at least in the top three as far as the different things that he came up with, his different ideas, and the impact that he had. So he developed all these different principles of operant conditioning. Now, he worked primarily with rats, right? So he would build what he called a Skinner box, or he called it an operating chamber. We just call it a Skinner box. And this is kind of what it would basically look like. And so you can see there with the rat right there at the tip of his nose is this little button or lever that they could push. And depending on when they push this behavior, the conditions, food would come out here at this kind of part right there. Right above that is a light, and then you can see kind of the on the floor, it's these like wires, and according to the conditions, it could be electrified. Okay. And so what he wanted to do first and foremost was have the rat learn to push the button. Right. So what he would do, rat pushes the button, food's going to come out. All right. Once the food comes out, it goes and eats, and very quickly it will learn, oh, push the button. That means food. Push the button, get some food. Push the button, get some food. And it learned there's the behavior. This is the consequence of that behavior. Like it produces something, right? And so then what Skinner would do was start to adapt it some. All right. So you couldn't just push the button anymore. The rat had to push the button 5 times. Right? You push it 5 times and then you get your food. And there was some resistance at first, but it learned this new behavior. Push the button 5 times, then get the food. Right. So we call this general process reinforcement. Right. So anything that increases the likelihood of a behavior is reinforcement. Now, it sounds like that would be a good thing, but it's not necessarily a good thing. We have to see it in a very neutral way because we can reinforce good, appropriate behaviors just like we can unfortunately reinforce bad or inappropriate behaviors, right? So imagine you're a parent in the grocery store and your child is pitching a fit because they want a candy bar and they just keep getting louder and louder and louder. The worst thing you can do is give them the candy bar because at that point they learned that's what I need to do next time. I will continue to act like a little tyrant because it's going to get me what I want, right? They learn to continue to do that behavior. If we want to stop a behavior, we call that punishment, right? And again, it sounds like a bad thing, but a punishment can be applied to good behaviors and bad behaviors. Just depends on how it was being done. So punishment just means we are decreasing the likelihood of a behavior. right? So in the case of the rat in the Skinner box, maybe we don't want them to push the button or we don't want them to push it during certain times. So what we might teach them is that, all right, push the button, get some food, but if that light is on, don't push the button because what's going to happen, they push the button when the light's on, that floor is electrified, it starts to shock them, right? And they learn very quickly, don't do that, all right? They will stop that behavior, okay? The thing with punishment, though, that we have to be very careful with is that even though it produces faster results, in the end, reinforcement is always more effective, all right, especially for long-term learning. Because the problem that we're going to have with punishment is that we might not be teaching the behavior or the outcome that we want, right? So, for example, if my son, when he was younger, if he was hitting one of his sisters and we punished him for that, and there was some kind of discipline, I don't know if he learned don't do that because it's bad, or did he learn don't get caught doing that? All right, so that's why we have to be very careful with punishment. It's going to have some severe limitations. So what we often find is that once the punishment stops, the person reverts back to the previous behavior. All right, so that's why we have to kind of be careful with it. With all this, though, we have the two main things, reinforcement and punishment. However, each of these can be either positive or negative. Okay, and again, that sounds like good and bad, positive, negative. That's literally what it means, but not in this particular context. All right, when we say positive in terms of operant conditioning, it just means we're adding something, and if it means negative, it means we're taking something away. Right. So the best way to think about this is when we're given different scenarios with operant conditioning, we want to first ask ourselves, what's the behavior here that we're trying to manipulate or control or change? What's the behavior? And if we're ever not sure, because operant conditioning is all about the consequences, we want to ask, what did the person already do? What's already happened? Okay. From there, we then ask ourselves, do we want to increase or decrease the likelihood of this behavior? All right, so if we're increasing, we're using a reinforcement strategy. If we're decreasing, the goal is a punishment strategy. All right, so what's the behavior? What's the goal of that behavior? And the third question, and this is where the positive and negative comes in, it says basically, how are we going to accomplish this? What are we going to do? When we talk about manipulating those consequences, manipulating what happens, how are we going to do that? Right. So, in terms of the rat in the Skinner box, if they're pushing the button and we want to reinforce that behavior, a positive way to do that is to give them something. We're going to give them the food pellet. All right. So, by giving something, we can either increase or decrease a behavior. If we want to increase it, we're going to give something that the person wants or would be desirable to them. If we want to do positive punishment, we're giving something to lessen the likelihood of a behavior, then we're going to give them something they don't want. All right. So you show up late to work, your boss gives you extra chores or tasks to do while you were there that you don't want to do. Right. We want to have you stop coming in late. Whereas with negative, we want to take something away in the hopes that it's going to increase your behavior. All right. So if I want somebody to do something, I want to ask myself, what is something I can do that would take away something they don't want, something that's undesirable, something that's unpleasant, right? So if I'm a boss at work and I want to kind of reward people for coming in on time, I want to ask myself, what's the one thing, what's the one job no one wants to do? You're the first one in. I will take that job away from you, right? It's negative because I'm taking it away. And because I took it away, I use a negative approach, it's going to increase the likelihood of that behavior. Okay. But on the punishment side of things, I want to take something away so it decreases the likelihood of the behavior. Right. So if you're a parent with a teenager who came home too late, right? Coming home late is not a behavior that we want to continue. We want that to stop. So we're going to take away privileges, right? We're going to take away car keys or their phone or whatever it may be. We're taking something away with the goal that it's going to decrease behavior, right? So in a nutshell, that's operant conditioning. There's a lot of nuances here and there with it. The best thing to do is to always run through examples, right? Run through example after example after example. And the best way to look at those examples, those three steps. Number one, what's the behavior? Number two, what's the goal here? We're trying to increase or decrease that behavior. That lets us know if it's reinforcement or punishment. And then lastly, how are we going to do that? What's the manipulation? Are we giving something in which it's positive, in which case it's positive, or are we taking something away, in which case it's negative? All right, if we do that step-by-step process as we run through examples, it's a little bit easier for us to see how operant conditioning is used. This can work with anybody. Doesn't matter how old or young they are, their intellectual capacity, operant conditioning works. This is what we use to do to train animals. And unfortunately, it's what we can use to train humans as well. The key thing, though, to differentiate it from classical conditioning, we focus on the outcome of a behavior, and it's focusing on voluntary behaviors, the things that we still have control over.